Welcome to the Stay Informed podcast. I'm your co-host, Jessica Gonzalez. Today, we have a couple of special guests to talk to us about fraud. Steve Weger, our general manager of auto, who's joined us from a previous podcast. We are now joined by Kartheek Veeravalli, head of auto product as well. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. Kartheek, we'll start with you. If you could please share a little bit about your background.
Hi, Jessica. Super excited to be on this podcast, and Steve, nice chatting with you as well. I'm super excited about this topic. All right, a little bit about me. I kicked off my career at FICO in analytics and credit risk management. And for the most part of my career, about 7 years, I spent at Defy Solutions as the chief product officer, as responsible for the overall product strategy and product management lifecycle. A year after its merger in 2021, I left Defy looking for other opportunities. Just before Informed, I joined Tricolor. Tricolor is a company that sells and finances cars, just like CarMax or DriveTime. I was the head of product and engineering there. And then I joined Informed about a year and a half ago. Super excited to be here working with you all. I'm the head of product auto here at Informed and excited to be on this podcast now.
Thanks, Kartheek. I really appreciate you joining us today. And I love doing these because I always learn a little bit more insight and always so impressed with the staff that we have here at Inform. So thank you. Steve, and once again, thank you so much for rejoining in the podcast. I'm glad that I didn't scare you away. I loved our previous conversation that we had, and I love talking about fraud. So really excited for this conversation. So let's just jump into it. Steve, do you want to give a refresher of your background as well?
Sure. I've been in the auto industry for the past 23 years. The vast majority of that at Capital One, where for the last 6 years, I led our sales and originations team, where in this role, I led the sales team, the fraud team, the funding team, our dealer analytics team, and our dealer administration teams. So that was a whole bunch of fun. I really loved that. Then I came over to Inform because I was so impressed with the products here at Informed. I've been here for the past 4 months and really excited about our future and our growth.
Thanks, Steve. All right. Well, I had a rough start of the podcast. We had to do a couple of retakes already. I think we'll have some funny bloopers. Let's start with the lightning round, this or that. Steve, I'll start with you. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Tea, me too. All right, Kartheek, what about you? What would you say is your best soft skill?
I would say communication. I think communication is super critical for a team or a company to function at its maximum levels. And I think I'm good at it. Of course, other people have to say it, not me, but still.
All right, sounds good. What about last book you read, business or pleasure?
Ooh, so nowadays I'm more into podcasts than books, but I listened to a book in Audible. For some reason, I wanted to go back. I only saw a couple of episodes of Cosmos, but I wanted to listen to the whole book. So I listened to Cosmos by Carl Sagan. So that was fun.
Nice. I go back and forth between the audibles and the hard book back. I'm a, kind of paper person. I like to write in them and highlight and all the good stuff. But I haven't, even though we're doing this podcast, I need to get to more of the podcasts. I've been listening to a cybersecurity podcast, and it's like really short. It's like 5 minutes, and it gives you like the updates of what's happening and everything. And it's been really beneficial. So I do recommend that one as well. So, all right, well, we will jump right in. So kind of like focusing, I think, the high level of fraud, right? That means so much to so many people, and especially to Informed, who is such an advocate of making sure that we're doing the right things for the right people and our consumers, as well as our lenders. So Kartheek, how does LLMs help fight fraud, and how does Informed utilize them?
Yeah, so LLMs is obviously one of the hottest topics, right? And just for the listeners or viewers, LLM is large language model, and of course, it's just one methodology within the machine learning models family that we use here. There are different techniques like layout LM model, or nowadays the more popular called MLLM, multimodal large language model, which is usually an LLM is just based on text, whereas a multimodal large language model is text plus images plus documents and other things. So obviously machine learning has been advancing at a very high rate. And we use these techniques like LLMs or MLLM or other techniques to understand more about our documents. So we use that to understand whether the document seems legit. Like how do we extract data from it? We use these techniques to extract data, which is our more standard doc intel product, but we also use this to understand whether there is misalignment in the document, whether there is a font difference in the document. And there is also a technique called RAG, retrieval augmentation, and generation. And this is like creating like a memory for the LLM. So you create a RAG with different sets of documents. So you give different examples. So when you see a new, let's say a bank statement that comes in, you would tell the LLM to go back, look in the RAG to see that for this, say, Bank of America bank statement, do you see any difference from the previous documents that you have seen? Like, does the font look different? Does the alignment look different? So that is a technique that people often use called RAG to give memory to LLMs so that LLMs have more context about understanding a given document. So again, this is one of the few examples. We obviously do different things, but just wanted to give a flavor of what we do here at Informed with like these techniques like LLMs.
Thanks. So you kind of mentioned a couple of different types of, fraud, like your, kind of the context that you're talking about, as well as, the data elements, but then also the document representation. So, Steve, can you answer a little bit of like, what are the ground rules of fraud? Like when we say fraud, what do we mean here? And how do we fight it specifically?
Yeah, fraud is a really broad term. And so I love that you asked this question. Traditionally, when you go to a lender and you ask them about fraud, they're going to bring up, well, this means the person isn't the actual person on the application. Either it is somebody who has borrowed an identity, created an identity, or enhanced an identity to fake who they are. But it's much bigger than that. It is also about misrepresenting aspects of the deal structure. It could be the income, it could be the vehicle, it could be the add-on products they're bringing in, or the residency. And so it's actually a very, very broad world for us to go look at. And we at Informed look at, okay, how can we attack all these elements? And when we think about that, like the biggest gap that we think our lenders are dealing with, at least initially, is in this income space. And that's where we're focusing our efforts currently.
That's a great point. I think, whenever we think about fraud historically, especially in underwriting, we talk about the KYC, the know your customer. So it really focuses on a lot of that identity fraud and the misrepresentation. But I'm a big advocate that income fraud is really important because it really affects the deal structure and the ability to pay back. So Kartheek, what are some of the attributes that tie into fraud, such as misrepresentation in the document, specifically around income fraud or identity fraud?
Yeah, so to expand on what Steve and you were talking about, so most of the misrepresentation that we are seeing or we are trying to identify are within the consumer documents, right? Because that's the document you typically where you see the consumer is giving to you. And so at some point, there is a potential for it to be misrepresented, like whether it's elements of the document or the whole document itself could be created from a template, like from a fake template. Nowadays on the internet, you find a lot of different templates where people can just create a paste out of thin air, right? So the elements, particularly again, income, as you all said, is the most important of all, because that's where we are seeing the biggest misrepresentation happening. And obviously, if somebody misrepresents their income, they have a better chance of getting approved, which we all know. So it's the little things like, when they, for example, they misrepresent a particular bank statement, it could be the font is off or the misalignment in certain things, or they take a different bank statement and they edit few things and they forget to change some very basic things like the overall cash balance. So they would change certain transactions within the bank statement, and there are methodologies on how you can do it. But the ending and the starting balance doesn't add up for all the transactions. So there are misrepresentations elements like that. Or if it's a pay stub, they would edit few things. And sometimes you would even see typos in these bank statements. And going back to your previous question around LLMs can help whether, basic things like, is the document well formed? Are there any typos in the document? And you go back and see that if those could mean that if there is a misrepresentation or maybe some other mistake that happened in the document. So typically elements like that is what we are looking for when we talk about misrepresentation. misrepresentation in income docs and with identity docs like passport. In a passport, for example, when they change certain things, there is an MRC code at the bottom, and that has to tie up with what the passport on the cover page says. And if it doesn't, then you know that there is some sort of a misrepresentation happening. So these are the different elements that we are looking for typically when we talk about misrepresentation in documents.
Yeah, I love that you brought up all those things, Kartheek. And then some of those elements are digital elements. They are, part of that digital document or the image that you're getting. And can you find inconsistencies there? Some of them that you brought up are the formatting of either the bank statement or the pay stub, and that's great to look after. And then some of them are the data that's within the pay stub. And when you think about it from a lender's perspective, they only have access to their own information. And so they only see so many pay stubs and bank statements and other income documents to go through. So it makes it harder for them to identify those digital and formatting constructs. Inform, because we see so much of those, has an advantage to be able to help in that space more than any lender could help themselves. But in the data is where it's really different, where we can see a transaction ID for something submitted to lender A that is repeated in a submission to lender B, and no lender on their own could ever come up with something like that. They just don't have access to that information. But Inform, with its broader circulation, is able to do that. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, Kartheek.
Yeah, I think those are all really, really great points, Steve. I think from the perspective of, we try to find a lot of correlations between income fraud and identity fraud. And I often say that it's sad, but at this point that there's lower barrier to entry to create fraudulent income documentation than it is to create fraudulent identity documentation, just because there's been so much regulatory and compliance focus on identity. But we also see here, like you said, because of the consortium and seeing so many different data elements across so many different organizations and lenders and consumers, that there is some correlation between income as well as identity fraud, and understanding kind of what those attributes look like and how that you tie it out into misrepresentation in the documents. I think it's also really critical to understand that from within the auto segment, a lot of times we put the identity representation and document validation on a dealer and then really focus on the income. And the biggest part of that, I think, why Inform really focuses on income fraud is because a lot of underwriters don't have the ability to even look at some of those identity documents, and they only really have the ability to focus on income fraud. So I think it's a really great call out to say that because there's so many different ways and how you're looking at it, but that Informed is really focused on the ability to onboard a loan as well as catch anything that from the ability to pay back that loan puts a lender in a position that is more riskier than not. So what are your thoughts on that, Kartheek?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And just one thing to add to what you said, Jessica, is I also believe that the industry has, in general, focused on identity misrepresentation quite a bit over the years. There are different players in that space who try to solve that problem in very, very different ways. Like there are, people who do like ID.me that IRS uses, right, to like validate your identity. And there are so many other providers who do that. But when it comes to income misrepresentation, to your point, there are very few providers out there who do a good job in understanding whether the consumer or the borrower is actually misrepresenting income. So I do agree that is definitely something that the industry needs to help with lenders with all the misrepresentation that's happening. And to your point, it's the barrier to misrepresenting income right now is so low with all these things that are available on the internet. So it definitely, I think that's a space where lenders could be helped more in finding that misrepresentation around income.
Yeah, thanks, Kartheek. Informed has a very clear understanding of what type of fraud we're focused on and what type of fraud we're assisting lenders with. Steve, with your background, can you tell us some of the lender problems and how lenders are thinking about AI fraud and kind of the aspects and how that's kind of affected some of the progress and strategy that we're focused on with that Informed?
Yeah, I would love to jump into that. So credit risk models are becoming more and more sophisticated. They're using the same types of AI that we're using to identify fraud to better underwrite their infrastructure. But they really need to make sure that the information they get is accurate. The person is the person, the deal is the deal, the money is the money, the car is the car. And the more sophisticated and precise they get, the more having that misinformation in the deal structure or in any part of the application upsets it and makes them have a bad credit underwriting bet. And so I really think it's really important and more important than ever for lenders to be sure that they know which the information is accurate and having that security. And Informed can help in that space. The second thing, when a lender gets misrepresentation, they don't know if this is the lender or the customer who's doing it, or if it's the dealer who's doing it, or if it's some combination of both. And again, if you only have your own information, it becomes really hard because your viewpoint is, well, I could just be getting, the lower end from this dealership, and I'm getting sort of that falsehood that's coming my way. But with Informed, we can give you the whole perspective on the dealer. All the lenders who go to that dealership that are Informed customers and where we have our information from, giving you that perspective, and it gives you a much wider range to say, hey, here's the dealerships where it is much more likely that misrepresentation can happen, and here's the dealerships where misrepresentation almost never happens or never does happen. And that enables you to also sort of update your own dealer risk framework, which is a powerful tool for you to go after. And then the third thing is, even if you get an indication of identity fraud, you still want to make sure you're not throwing out, the good with the bad. And so you work really hard at your verifications. And those verification tools are constantly being tested by fraudsters as they evolve. We used to start off with a KYC quiz, but that thing has become almost useless in terms of fighting fraud. Now government ID is a big thing, but synthetic government IDs are becoming pretty easy to capture for some of the things that Kartheek was saying. And so actually being able to identify documents and ask customers for documents that you can verify are accurate is another powerful tool to even protect against identity fraud.
I think those are great aspects. I think to bundle it up too, like from a dealer management perspective, when we looked at all of those documents, people are manually reviewing. And so if somebody's on that, list of, hey, maybe this dealer is good and maybe this dealer is not so good, usually from, at our perspective, we would have to go in and, review 100 deal jackets, audit them, and understand what they're looking at. I think the big thing about Informed is that, like you said, the aggregation of entire deal jackets from dealers, not only in your portfolio, but like from other lenders understanding that the dealer behavior is. And I think it's also a good benefit, right, for dealers that maybe historically have been struggling to prove that they are, in that good space and that they can provide that. So I think it's a good opportunity for the good dealers, right? And then we're catching the ones that are not so great, but for them to provide confidence that it's a good market and they can provide good consumers at the end of the day. And, maybe they really aren't at fault for a couple of fraudulent identities there. So I think it's transparency and having more data and knowledge is really important. And I think from the perspective too, is when we start talking about, doc fraud, and I think Kartheek, you brought up a really good point about the data elements and understanding, I think we've all seen some crazy fraud stories out there in the industry, but, we always think about just, does it all end in zeros? But it's a lot more complicated than that, right? There's calculations in there. And it's really just the human element to it, because I know that even when we flag some applications as fraudulent and I'm going through them and I'm looking at it, I'm like, what's wrong with this application? It looks fine to me. And I even did that once. And one of them had Walmart as one word and Wal-Mart in the same application. One was an applicant and then the co-applicant, and they had different templates and they had different spellings of Walmart. And I was still like, oh, it looks okay. So I think that's a good call out. How do you think, from the industry perspective, Kartheek, do you think people are looking at those kind of contexts from a document fraud perspective?
I think some of it, sure, but I think there's so much that goes in a given document. I think it's very tough for a human to keep in line with everything, to do like 15 things that you need to check on a given document. And if you do that in a waterfall approach, one after the other, the time it takes to do that will be much larger, right? And then suddenly you have people spending a lot more time on processing a single document, increasing the total cost of processing the loan itself. So I think when it comes to humans doing this, it's not efficient or effective to that aspect. So this is exactly where I feel like automation and AI comes into play, right? And where we could have 20 different rules, or what we internally call them heuristics, but ultimately it's a rule, right? Like to your point, like Walmart should be one word, because we have seen templates from Walmart and we know how Walmart looks on the pay stub. So we could easily take employer names and say, like, look into my memory and tell me for this particular employer, how does that template look like? And I can compare the incoming pay stub with the templates that I have seen in the past and easily understand whether that's where the consortium of data again comes into play that Steve was talking about. So doing this in an automated way is definitely where I think the efficiency is, unlike a human doing it.
Yeah, let me jump in just for a second, because I love the point you brought up around people taking a long time to do this thing. Like if you go ask any customer what's the worst part about buying a car today, they tell you how long it takes when you're at the dealership. And so dealers are constantly looking for ways to speed up the contracting, finance part of this. We also, lenders need dealers to be partners in this fight against fraud. But the only way you're going to solve those two conflicts is to make sure that you can be really thorough in your fraud detection and your misrepresentation detection, but do it as fast as possible. And that requires systematic, not manual processing to make that thing happen. This is how you're going to get dealers on your side of participating, is if they can meet their car buying needs, and you can also systematically go through all of these documents incredibly quickly. And Informed has technology to make that happen.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the outcome is that, when it comes to fraud, it's a team effort. And I think Informed and others in the industry really recognize that and really are focused on making sure that we're stopping fraud in their tracks and helping in that way. So well, that's all the time we have today. So I really appreciate, Steve, for you coming back to join us today, and Kartheek. Hopefully we didn't scare you all away. I loved our conversation and loved talking about fraud. Thank you, Steve and Kartheek. I am your host, Jessica Gonzalez, and remember to stay informed.